Hello and welcome to ERUPT, the home for how businesses can scale and transform. Throughout this podcast, we aim to inspire and educate to help you and your business thrive. Across the course of our episodes, we'll be interviewing industry leaders to uncover some of the challenges across the world of work. We aim to give an insight into some of the fastest growing organisations across HR and technology. Please follow us on our journey to ERUPT and elevate your business. This episode is from our ERUPT Learning and Talent Conference, which was hosted in September 2022. The conference focused on topics from developing emotional intelligence to creating a transparent future career. This episode focused on the topic of retention. Our panel included Paul Estes, who is founder of XpertLinkAI, and Shwetal Randive, who is Global Senior Director of Learning, Talent and Development and Employer Branding at Radisson Hotel Group. They spoke about the goal to retain people and whether we are still trying to achieve retention at all. Companies are still building a system where people want to stay, but the question now is not whether we are doing enough, but whether there is something that we can do differently. I hope you enjoy, and make sure you check out the Go ERUPT website for further content and for all videos on demand.
So we're going to be talking about captive or free. Is retention just a jail sentence? That's a big statement, isn't it? And I was looking at some of the questions we're going to be talking about, and they are really, really interesting. So this stat poll that apparently McKinsey & Co. said that 40% of employees surveyed are likely to quit in the next 3 to 6 months. Is retention worth it?
The question is that the goal? Is the goal to retain people? Because I don't believe the systems are set up to really deliver on that promise of retention. I think you look at companies and they focus on shareholder value, and that focus on shareholder value doesn't line up in many ways with retaining employees whose skills have outdated or organizations that have changed. And, it's a disruptive environment. I come from tech, and so I think I feel it more acutely than maybe others in other industries. And so my perspective, just so people that are listening, is from the tech industry. And I know that technology moves extremely fast. And I've watched many people, sort of have their skills atrophy and either be stuck and try to retain or be laid off and they don't have skills. And I think that's why, Shwetal, I'm really interested to hear your point of view from a learning and talent development perspective, because it's got to be hard.
Yeah, and it is. And especially for the industry as well, coming from in hospitality, I think we have seen in the last year and a half too, overall, the big, let's say, resignation that we speak about. And that in terms of, I think one thing that we need to look into is if retention is the goal or if it is the consequence, because I think that really shifts what we are trying to achieve. If we are trying to achieve engagement and making sure that the people can deliver the best while they are performing in an organization, retention is a consequence of it. So I think we should not put retention as a goal, but more have that as a soft, let's say, consequence that we are driving for, or not, most probably.
Interesting. I mean, 40%, Paul, that's a big percentage, isn't it?
Well, we've seen a massive shift of people, the number of companies that have been started, individual companies that have been started, the number of people that are refusing to go back to the office. And these are people with jobs at Apple and big name brands with big paychecks saying, hey, the way you want me to work no longer aligns with the way I want to live. And they're willing to take trade-offs of pay, of status of the company they work for, of where they live. And I think there's a bunch of people pushing on the traditional idea. I wrote an article pre-pandemic in Fast Company, and I pushed a lot of people calling it location bias, saying you don't have a diversity program if you don't have a remote program. It's just a fact. You have a compliance program, which is okay if you're in HR and you have a compliance program, but you don't have a true diversity program that reaches out to people. And now it's commonplace, this whole remote, hybrid, if you want the best talent, you're probably going to rent that talent. You're probably going to rent that talent for up to 3 or 4 years. That's how long people stay. And you need to build a system in an organization that realizes that reality. That reality has only been accelerated because of the pandemic, but it was there before.
So do you think we're doing enough, Shwetal? Do you think that businesses have switched on to what's been a really quick trend, right? Suddenly people have woken up. They're like, I want to do something different. I'm focusing on me. I'm a consumer. Vote with my feet. I'm quietly quitting. I'm going to go set up my own business. I'm going to go and be that, different lifestyle person. Our business is ready at the moment.
Yeah, and it is a reality. And I feel there the question is not so much about if we are doing enough, but I think can we do something differently? Because I feel each organization has put in all that they can and they would like to in these directions in terms of retaining and engaging teams. But is the same practices kind of not failing but not succeeding either? So that means that we need to be here in a pivotal change to think about what can we do differently, because the needs of the people and the individuals is changing. What Paul mentioned about still having being able to do the trade-offs on certain things might not have been the case before. So now if in case we need to match to those needs, we need to think differently as organizations as well. And there I think we need to adapt a bit towards what really our talent wants.
Yeah,
So,
James,
Paul,
I'll give you
yeah,
a
go on.
great tactical example. And it's coming out in my newsletter this morning, and I've been following this trend. Let's talk about moonlighting. There's a big trend on side hustles, and we're so happy for all these people finding their passion outside of work.
Yeah.
Until you run into the HR compliance system that calls it moonlighting, even if it's not competitive. Now, competitive moonlighting and sharing IP and stuff, that's egregious break of your employment contract. But organization systems and compliances do not comprehend this dual reality of your existence. They say, hey, if you want to earn money, you are an employee. You're captive. We own your IP, we own your time, and they don't take into account that people may want to learn skills outside of what the company can provide. And so the system isn't really built to allow people to explore business interests or, whatever they may want outside of the confines of the employment agreement. And so you look at these things, and it's again, that's when I go, you're held captive. They haven't really modernized these things and created a transparent and easy framework to allow an employee to come in, to provide extreme value to the company, and also explore, because the company no longer has a long-term commitment to them. That's just true. And so it's kind of in this weird spot where, hey, I'm not going to employ you for 30 years, but I'm going to make you work like I am going to employ you for 30 years until I'm done with your value to the company. So it's kind of a weird. That's why I do the captive to free thing. It's really interesting way to look at it.
So you talked about adaptation there, Shwetal. What can we do differently, as organisations that are going to make people feel like, as Paul said, that they're adding that maximum amount of value for the time that they're with us?
And I think that ties in very well about what Paul mentioned, but from a different perspective, because I feel if I look into the industry of hospitality, the career progression in general that you have within this industry is quite rapid. To become a general manager, generally you would take around 8 to 12 years, maximum 15 years, and there you are leading in an entrepreneurial way a hotel, running the business of that. I think there, in terms of what people really want, are looking for, is flexibility. And I think that is even more true for the industry that we are in. And I feel the other piece is around being able to develop these skills that can be helpful for people even after they leave this particular industry, for say. And I give you an example. Just a month back, I was interacting with young students who are studying hospitality, and I was chatting with this lady who wanted to start her own coffee shop. That was her dream. She is like, I'm looking at starting my own coffee shop in about 4 years from now. And there, for me, it was more around how my organization can help her in that dream by giving her the expertise, the knowledge, and the capabilities of how to run a coffee shop, how to run basically the operations of an F&B outlet. And that is where I feel we need to start thinking of careers which is more not like sequence of jobs that as we used to think about, but how you actually build transferable capabilities that can then help you, not necessarily in the role that you are looking at currently or in the future role, but into a completely different segment as well.
I think
Yeah.
it's a great example. And it's very powerful that you and your organization have that sort of maturity to be able to have those conversations, because most employees would feel I think, very timid or scared to go to someone and say, hey, look, in about 4 years, I'm leaving, because they feel there might be retribution or something else. And so that's a really great example.
Yeah, Paul, we're talking about flexibility. I'm seeing it all over the place, right? Obviously, most businesses have gone towards being more flexible because that's what people want. But then you've got the examples of Musk, right? Everybody's in, I don't care, 5 days a week. That's how we become productive. Who's right?
I think he's a really good example. I mean, if you're in manufacturing, I mean, there are jobs that require you to be there. And so I think when you parse this lack, flexibility, if you want to go work for a hyper growth manufacturing startup that's trying to change the world with a CEO that has unrealistic expectations because he's in a rush to get us to Mars, then, you chose that job and you know what you're getting into. And the Amazon culture is another great example. They put their culture out there for everybody to see. And there's some people who go there and thrive and love it. And there's some people that really struggle. So I do think that there is some onus on all of us who are looking for employment to find the right place. It's hard to go to a culture, and when they're transparent, you know exactly what it is, and then complain about it. You chose to spend your time, talent, and treasure in that organization. And so I think you said, James, something earlier, and it was a thing that Satya used to say at Microsoft is vote with your feet. But again, you have to make deliberate decisions. And so I do think responsibility goes on both sides.
Yeah. So, Shwetal, do you think we just have to sort of take it that, people do have this sort of move on mentality now that they are passing through, so to speak? Is that where we're just at now?
I think more from passing on, it is like careers have become very fluid, I feel. So it's no longer one trajectory that people think about, that okay, I start off here, 10 or 15 years later I see myself there, because things are moving so quickly. There is transformations that are happening in each and every industry, that I feel it is more going with the flow, having more shorter milestones that people think they would like to achieve, and from there exploring further. So more like doing a self reflection of where they are and where they want to head every couple of years.
I think
And that's what I feel. Just to add on, what Google had, which was like tour the role, which is about, okay, you are in a role for 2 or 3 years and then you move on into a different role. That really helps, because that challenges you, that helps you achieve certain things in a limited period of time. And then you are ready to take on something else. So you are not kind of, let's say, loyal to the company, but you're loyal to the role that you're taking on. And indirectly, of course, that loyalty to the company increases because you're giving those opportunities to the people.
I think that's a really good point. That look, it's true and has been true that people stay 2 or 3 years in a job for the most part. And so just acknowledging that and codifying that into how you approach people and say, hey, think about your next job. And the other thing I would say is it's our responsibility to invest in ourselves. The easiest thing to do is to show up at a job and not have to think about it, get your paycheck, quietly quitting or whatever you want to call it. But then when things happen or you're at a certain age and there's no opportunity. So I think the onus goes on the employees or people working now to invest in their career and understand it. I think everybody hears, hey, things are moving fast and, they're changing, and they don't really internalize what that means for them. The difference, how they need to show up and how they need to, invest in their career, because the company's not going to do it for you, and for the most part.
Are you saying then, Paul, that, these companies are thinking, I've got to retain X percentage of staff? That's just completely missing the mark, is it?
Well, I think some companies have good retention and bad retention. And so there are places, hey, it's not a fit, it's time for this employee to go. And so, you move on. I don't think systems are built to understand. I think the example that you shared from Google, I don't think most organizations are saying, hey, look, this is what your new career trajectory looks like. Not everybody wants to be a GM. Not everybody wants to be a manager. Maybe I want to go and work in a certain part of hospitality, and I want permission to be able to get sponsorship to transition to a completely different place. But I think at the managerial level, they want to hold on. And I don't think it's at the big corporate level. I think as a manager, I want to hold on to my people because I have responsibilities, and my paycheck is based on me delivering. And so if my star player leaves, that becomes a very personal hit to, my pay and my career. And so it's complicated.
Interesting. Yeah. how do you view it, Shwetal? Do you think differently about, maybe high potential or your star players in an organization?
I think there it is, I agree with Paul in terms of completely of like where exactly the challenge lies, because I don't think at many a times it is at the organization levels, but it is at a micro team or a managerial level. And it is important that that is identified early on, because I think there uh, the processes that people or teams have in place really help in the calibration of that talent. And I think that is very important to do on a regular basis and not be an annual or a biannual kind of exercise that is done on paper. And how do we move that talent and how do we action on that is equally important as well.
And give managers the tools. I mean, I think that the organization has to give the managers the tools so they're not dinged for top talent wanting to move on. That's okay. If you develop someone and it's time for them to move on to something else because that's what's going to keep them in the organization providing value, then as a mid-level manager, you need to be able to be rewarded for that, and you also need to be able to meet your goals. And so the organization has to provide a different level of support than just business level KPIs, because otherwise you're stuck in the same thing. I'm going to try to hold on to you and keep you captive for all I can.
Yeah, it does feel
Absolutely, yes.
anecdotally
And
like.
I feel
Sorry,
the
go on.
tools to the managers, but also the visibility to the teams and to the employees of what prospects do they have with us or with the company, and then it is up to the employees to decide. And there I agree that the accountability is shared, but it is driven by the individual. So if you don't see any action from the individual, the employers can invest, but at what extent?
Yeah, as I say, it feels like the hardest time to be a manager, because everybody expects this hyper personalization that we were talking about earlier. Everybody's an individual.
Well, and your role has changed. I mean, most of these managers are or Gen Z, or Gen X. I'm sorry, Gen X. But most of these managers are Gen X, and we all just grew up in a different environment. So trying to change, 20 plus years into your career, and not being given hey, the world's going here, but nobody's helping you with the transition because nobody really has the answers. Is really hard for a lot of managers. They kind of paid their dues and they're supposed to sit at the head of the table and make decisions. And that model just doesn't work. But the question is, okay, what's the new model? And I think that's where a lot of everyone's kind of stuck is what is the new model? And we're figuring it out real time.
Do you think we're letting too much go? Do you think, I mean, you talk about Gen X, right? I grew up in a business where, it was good to sort of like, be there a long period of time. Over time, you hit competencies that you can only get with experience and you become more senior. But it does feel, and I sound probably like I'm coming from a certain, age demographic now, like people want everything now today. And do we need to be pushing back and saying, you know what, you can't become a great manager or lead this team without having X amount of experience? That certain things you can't do without becoming quite good.
I think there's I think there's a lot of generations that are going to. I think there's give and take on both sides. I think it's not completely true that you need 15 years or 20 years of experience to have a certain job. And I also don't think just because you have a social media account with a bunch of followers that you're ready to be a vice president in 2 weeks. And so I think there's a balance. And I think that the friction is good. The question isn't, is the friction good or bad? The question is, how do you manage the friction? How do you do it in a responsible way where you're not taking employees who've been there 15 years and kicking them to the side and making them feel that their value is not appreciated, at the same time bringing sort of new thinking and more fluid working into the workplace? And that's hard. I mean, take that, the generational divide or the generational makeup of workplaces, and now put gender and other things into the workplace. And it's a very complicated place where I don't know that a lot of people feel psychological safety when they show up to work every day. Right.
It is hard, right? It's really hard. Shwetal, how do you manage that friction? What are the interventions you can put in place to make that journey more seamless?
I think firstly, it's like really having those transparent conversations as well, because I agree that friction would always exist, not only with from a generational point of view. I think it always existed when you have a dialogue between a team member and a manager looking at careers completely differently. So there's nothing new, but I think it is more around how do you provide those tools and the right kind of basically toolbox to the managers and the employees since the beginning of how does it look like in the organization. And then I go back to what Paul was mentioning. If in case that framework is not suitable to what you are looking at, then most probably it's not the right place for you. It's as simple as that. And I think there needs to be an alignment between what an individual is looking at and what an organization can offer during that time,
Yeah.
and that's a match. And if in case it's not a match, it might not be the right time. It could be at a later stage that a team member or an employee can come back.
And I think there's an empathy. Sorry, James. And I want to build on what Shona said. I think there's an empathetic way to have that conversation. You're not a bad employer or a bad person if a culture or a job role is not a fit. And I think too often it's, hey, if you're not a fit or something has changed, we're trained to say, well, then I'm bad, or I've done something wrong, or I'm not good enough to be in this organization. And that's not the case. And so I think, groups have to be more empathetic to say, hey, okay, well, this doesn't work, but let me work with you to find something that does before I take the arcane method of putting you on a PIP and firing you out the door. Like that, those are sort of the tools that managers have been given when somebody's just not a fit for a job. And that's the kind of thing that I think people are rebelling against, because companies don't have a way to have an empathetic conversation about it.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. No, go on, Shwetal. You carry on. I'm ready. You finish.
No, I was just going to build on what Paul said, because it's true. I think empathetical conversation is a key, because we can't go by an SOP or certain kind of rules of this is how the conversation needs to happen. It's a human conversation. But I feel that is also the frame of the conversation, because I think many a times the frame of the conversation is very narrow. It focuses on the job and the role that you're doing today, and then the possibilities to have this conversation in a broader way is limited because you're talking about that. But I think soon you start speaking about a career as a whole. I think the possibilities that you can actually discuss and the honest conversation that you can have is much bigger, because that can give you different scopes and different alternatives that you can explore as well as a manager or a leader together with the team.
No, that's fascinating. We were talking earlier about sort of maybe 30% of the workforce is now Gen Z coming through. I'm just wondering, do you guys think this is end state? The forces we've talked about, is that it? We've arrived at the end of what they want and how we treat them, or is there I know we come to Z, so that's naturally A. What's coming next? What can we forecast, predict, and how do we react to that?
I think there's one thing that's true, is that it's going to be very different. And another thing that's true is it's going to accelerate in the way it changes. And so I think, I have two young daughters, 7 and 8. And part of my journey, my personal career journey, is to figure out what the world's going to look like for them. So why I, have written about the gig economy and really work in this sort of more fluid way of working. My father gave me great advice. He said, son, find a good brand, be good, be a good employee, work for a good manager, and they'll take care of you. And he spent 30 years at a very large company, and he had that. He had a big retirement party. And I knew about 6 years ago that just wasn't going to be possible in my journey. And so I felt I had a responsibility not only to my career to figure it out in a very hard way. By the way, it's not easy, in a very hard way, but also for my girls who will be part of A, B, or C, the future generations.
Yeah, no, who knows what's going to happen? Shwetal, where do you see it going?
Well, I think time will only say, because I think what all we could predict is changing so quickly. And there I feel the agility that we need to have is fundamental, because I don't think this is at an end or we have figured it out. I think it's just a start. So we will see a lot of things that we need to look into and look broader in terms of careers of people, and not focus so much on companies as such in terms of where we are looking from a progression point of view.
Yeah, it's true. Companies aren't very agile, are they, really, when it comes down to building that agility? If forces are accelerating, Paul, is really, really important. And obviously people want... Go on.
In many ways, they're designed not to change. And if business is going good, or even if business is going bad, the inertia inside a company to continue to do the same thing is really hard to overcome. And that's just reality. And I think the only thing that's going to make the change is when your top talent votes with their feet, or you're no longer able to get people to come and work for you.
Yeah. So how do you build agility, Shwetal?
I think it is on different elements. I think it is more around from a strategic point of view or from the top, how basically the strategy is defined and cascaded further. I think there is a point of that, of how everyone is included in that. I think the second point is around the flexibility of roles. I think that gives a lot of framework and flexibility on certain things. I think luckily I feel that we are in an industry wherein that flexibility comes really easily, and we are in that stage wherein Paul was mentioning that we are looking into having difficulties in attracting talent, not from a company point of view but more from an industry point of view. So there we do need to reinvent a bit about what we are looking at from people and what kind of jobs and careers we can offer them. And that flexibility I feel is very well perceived. I can tell you, like myself, in my role, I spend 30% of my time on things that are not related to my role, but into completely different projects that might not be part of my title or my role, but that gives me so many expertise and skills that I can grow into some other kind of role in the future.
Yeah. Paul, we talked earlier about Musk, right? He wants everybody back in the office, whether or not you're manufacturing or head office, he doesn't care. There's a lot of business leaders like that. Trend is towards flexibility. Do you really think that being more flexible makes us more productive when, obviously certain jobs, or maybe every job, requires good communication, which potentially only happens when you're with somebody in person, right?
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating debate. I think there's arguments on both sides. There's statistics on both sides. It's a generational discussion. So at some point, it's just this hard line, like I believe this to be true, or I'm more productive this way. I think it puts an onus on companies to define outcomes. And I think a lot of companies have been, are say lazy, but not super pejoratively, like don't write things down, don't spend the time on the outcomes to understand what success can look like. And so entering into a remote or hybrid world requires you to work differently and with different technology. And I think everyone's trying to figure that out. And again, it goes back to, I vote with my feet, and if you want certain talent, you're going to engage them in a different way. And that's why I think the digitization of independent labor, or call it the gig economy, will be in every industry. You're seeing it definitely in hospitality and others, where they're saying, hey, I need a person that can provide this outcome. And you're able to get them in a different way than traditional hiring or staffing practices.
Sure. Where do you see it, Shwetal? Do you think do you believe that more productive flexibly, or having
I think
Musk
flexibility
approach?
for now, we are looking really flexibility in terms of the location and the place. I think there is so much layers of flexibility in general. I think if I have to think about offices wherein we operate and where we sit, I think there the flexibility is key and fundamental. But at the same time, I am in between, I would say, because while I think it needs to be not at there needs to be a clear alignment at an organization level where we want to head, but then there needs to be a flexibility at a team or at a function level as such, because that's where I think most of the movement happens, so to say. So I think if in case there is a clarity there of how as a team we organize, then I think it would function really well.
Yeah. Do you think we're different, Paul? Is Gen Z so much more different to any, in terms of what the modern employee looks for from a job? Are we changed?
I think they have options. When I was entering the workforce, there wasn't an option because we didn't have wireless internet. So you had to go, to the company and, sign in. I think there's options. And I think like the democratization of all technology makes a bunch of scenarios possible. And so I don't think that I don't think that's why I push back on a lot of these panels that say, oh, well, this generation, we all wanted flexibility. We all wanted the number one thing in every HR poll was behind money was flexibility to do my job where I want and how I want to provide value because the technology exists. So that's not new information. I think you're seeing a new generation push on that and say, well, we can, and I'm not going to come work for you and drive to. So they're making different choices because they're at a different stage of their career. And I think that's what's pushing the industry forward, a lot of industries forward.
Yeah. I've got a point from Bernadette in the chat there about customer service working from home, ! distractions all around them, no one overhearing their attitude. We used to talk about raving fans, customer experiences, customer goodwill now at risk. So,
I've seen it. I always talk about Intuit, which is a great example where they, take CPAs and bookkeepers and fans of their ecosystem and put them in the experience, right?
yeah.
And so that's an example of engaging your ecosystem or your experts or the people that are rabid or have expertise in your area and finding a different way to engage them, right? And so I think we're going to see really different ways for, even in customer service, we're starting to see companies go and find fans all around the world of that company, brand ambassadors, and say, hey, if you want to come work with us, we have opportunities. And it's not a W-2 opportunity, it's a remote opportunity. And so call it customer service or customer success. We're seeing those sort of models come out of the pandemic.
Love it. So guys, I didn't tell you before the session, but the three of us are going to go into business tomorrow. We start a consultancy firm up, yeah? And we're going to go into some of the top businesses in the world and give them some ideas about what it means to be in the modern workforce. What are the three things that we're going to get them to nail as organizations? Shwetal, tough question. But what do modern companies need to nail in terms of driving employee experience?
I think firstly to start with is culture. That is the fundamental, I feel, because people want to come to a place and an environment that they can associate with. So whatever is the culture, I think that needs to be well defined as such. The second is, I feel, management of talent and careers in general, how that can be started early on, and how do we as organizations vehiculate that very cleverly. That's the second piece. And third piece, I would say, is attracting talent in different ways and going to the places that they are rather than asking them to come to us.
Interesting. Paul?
I would start with empathetic listening. I think the number one thing, and I don't think polls do a good job of this because they're designed in a structured way to get a certain, I think there's empathetic listening to say, what do people want from a career perspective? How do different people vision their career, and do some deep thinking based on that listening? I think the second thing, and I advocate for this all the time, is, have a gig economy strategy. And I say this because it really pushes on how you engage talent. It pushes on this idea that it's a system where you let people come in and come out and provide value. And I think that has ramifications and learnings to your staffing strategy and to your W-2 employment strategy. So I always advocate for that. I don't think it's a major part of every business, but I do think having a program and learning from it is important. I think the third thing, and Shwetal, you said this, is empower at the team level, right? Don't try to put a bunch of hard-coded policies at the organizational level. Let your managers be managers, give themselves some rope to learn, and hold them accountable to, some transparent metrics of transformation. And I think you have to do that at the manager level. And that's where you'll see the friction between generations and a lot of other things.
Fantastic. Guys, we've already rattled through the 30 minutes so quickly. Shwetal, closing point from you?
I think captive or free, that is a continuous debate, but I feel here we need to really go with what the new generation and a modern, let's say, talent is looking for. And when I mean modern, I don't look at it from an age, but I think we all are evolving. Our needs and our expectations from organizations are evolving. So how basically we can, as organizations, keep up with that is crucial.
Paul?
Yeah, the world's changing. Invest in yourself and invest in learning. And I know that it's, the continuous learning gets a little cliche sometimes, but read everything that you need to know. Is there's, a flood of content out there. And so invest in yourself, spend some time reading, spend some time listening to people that are thinking about it. Because I think it'll help you become a better leader. And I think it'll help you manage your career better. And so when I say invest in yourself, take time and read a book. Might be the best thing you've ever done. It was for me.
You know what? I might just take you up on that. Guys, thank you. It's been lovely. Really enjoyed spending a bit of time with you there. Thank you so much for your thoughts and contributions. That was amazing.
This podcast was brought to you by ERUPT at Annapurna, the #1 platform that case studies the organisations that not only disrupt, but those that erupt. Please visit our new Go ERUPT website for more content and log in to watch the full episodes from the conference. Thank you for listening to today's episode. make sure to watch out for the next.